But one of the most important things, and the reason why, for example, the FPI is totally new, it's not like a fork of a fork of a fork or something, or like, hey, like, let's launch this. I bet it'll get like, 500 million TVL or like pump the price or whatever. The reason we do stuff that's like extremely difficult, but also obviously has like a hopefully a top five crypto or $1 trillion vision kind of thing is it's difficult to be a positive impact in the world than it is in crypto than just to make money, right? Especially these days. And one of the main things that I always try to do is try to see how to be a positive sum value creating, live player in the ecosystem rather than kind of value extractive or like make money and take it, right? And because that's not ultimately what this is all about. So it's just more of the idealistic but really important reasons. Like people kind of see Vitalik, for example, as a really good kind of thought leader and kind of leader of the broader, Ethereum slash crypto space, because I think he's also motivated by the same thing of you want to make the world like a better place and actually create positive value rather than try to extract or absorb value from somewhere, right? In like a zero sum manner. So I always think, how do you create actual value and make things better rather than just simply how does value come to me?
Welcome to Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel, where we explore projects in decentralized finance that are innovating and driving our mission of financial freedom forward. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review Mission DeFi and spread the word by posting a tweet to the show. All opinions expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests are their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Black Knox, Material Indicators, or any other affiliated organizations. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests as an inducement to make a particular investment, follow a particular strategy, or become involved with any project. A project being featured on the show is not an endorsement of that project in any way. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Now, here's Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel.
I am excited today to have back one of my favorite guests, Sam Kazemian from Frax. Frax is an algorithmic stablecoin platform, but doing quite a bit more than all of that. And the last time we spoke, we took a pretty deep dive into Sam's background, but also a pretty deep dive into how Frax functions and what it is. And so today we're going to do a follow-up because Sam and the team have been making quite a bit of progress on building their replacement for the consumer price index called the Frax Price Index. And there's a lot of other news kind of happening around the stablecoin world. So I've been really looking forward to getting Sam back on and talking about what's going on. And I know, Sam, you've been traveling a lot and running left and right, but if you could quickly introduce yourself a little bit to everybody, and I'll just tell everyone, if you want Sam's full background, go listen to the first episode we did with him. I'll post a link in the show notes. But thanks for joining us again, Sam. It's great to have you on.
Hey, Brad, thanks so much. It's great to be back on again. I love your show. So I'm Sam, one of the founders of Frax, and yeah, it's been really good since the last time we were on, and just like in DeFi, everything happens like every week is basically, a year. And you had a bunch of awesome guests on. I think you had Zeus on from Olympus DAO as well after.
I did. I put you, Zeus, and my interview with Scoopy from Alchemix as my top three. You guys were all awesome guests and do such a great job explaining everything.
Thanks, thank you. Yeah, and so since then we've grown a lot in terms of both frac supply. We have over 600 million fracs
Wow.
stablecoins outstanding. Yeah, and growing by I think tens of millions of fracs a week in terms of growth, and getting close to shipping the Frax Price Index, or FPI version 1. That's slated for late November, so literally this month. And as a lot of people know, maybe software might be 1 or 2 weeks later, slightly something like that, but definitely slated for late November, early December. So super excited about how that's coming and the really unique token economics there. And that's the second stablecoin of the Frax protocol. So Frax itself is the dollar pegged stablecoin, and FPI is what will track a consumer price index plus inflation resistance factor. So some kind of like CPI plus maybe whatever the governance inflation factor is, like 6%, 5%. People will probably vote more than 2.5%, which is the Fed reported or inflation, but we'll see, and it'll be really fun and interesting. We also have kind of a unique design for the Frax Price Index, which is kind of like a treasury kind of system, and high yielding staking stablecoin system similar to Ohm, but entirely different, both in terms of code base and in terms of how it rebalances. There are kind of no bonds, so to speak. And for those familiar with Olympus DAO and Olympus bonds, since there's no bonds in FPI, that actually allows us to partner with Olympus Pro, which is their bond system. So to kind of get some of those bond functionalities and work together again with one of our favorite communities and protocols. But the way the FPI works is super new and novel. So that's going to be really interesting to see the game theory. With one thing that's really cool that we've decided to do, and obviously this isn't financial advice or investment advice, but we will distribute Genesis FPI stablecoins to FXS stakers. So if you have Frax shares, the FXS governance token, the FPI is airdropped to staking pairs of vfxs. And we're also thinking of doing Frax FXS LPs, which is the original pool 2 at the protocol launch. And as you probably know, and your readers might be familiar, is kind of like that, where the stablecoin is itself something you can get and stake. So the FPI, even though there's totally different mechanics and there's no bonds, it is a stablecoin you get and you stake for more FPI. So when you get those Genesis FPI supply, that's important, and that's how you get them, is by being kind of an FXS staker. There's no fundraiser, there's no second governance token, there's nothing like that at all. So that's been a really exciting distribution event. So when we're ready to launch, the community just gets a complete fair launch of FPI, which is what the plan is. So I think that's going to be extremely exciting. People always talk about it, and that's going to be a really cool way to get out the Genesis supply of a completely brand new stablecoin.
That's awesome. So I'm assuming you guys haven't done the snapshot that will determine who gets what, or is it just going to be at the time of the release that anybody that's in gets it?
Everyone asks that. Yeah, no, we haven't done it, and we will make sure to at least talk about it or post publicly about it 1 week ahead of any snapshot. So if it's
Nice.
coming at the end of November, probably the third week of November, we'll post something to make sure that there's complete public information. So like if people want to get in on it, or stake properly, or even just like strategize about how much they want to stake and things like that, there's no it being already taken, or benefiting insiders or anything like that. We super want to make sure that it's like a public fair launch distribution.
Very cool. All right. So what I'd like to do now is let's educate people a little bit. So some may or may not go back and listen to the first episode we did, but what I'd love to do is give us a high level overview of what Frax is today. And then, in our discussion last time, so I would encourage everybody listening to go back and listen to it, because in our discussion, we got into why having the Frax price index is actually so critical and important. It's important not only Frax, but it's actually important to all of crypto. And so I want to, if you don't mind, kind of backtrack, give everybody just your kind of, elevator pitch for what Frax is. And then let's get into why you're creating FPI and why it's important. And then can we kind of climb into a little bit about how that would function? I know it's early out there in California. I don't want to hurt you.
I'm a wide awake now. So Frax as a stablecoin, we like to kind of call ourselves as the inventors of the fractional stablecoin. That's where Frax gets its name, fractional algorithmic currency. And the unique thing about Frax is that it targets the exchange rate of the stablecoins out in the open market to keep the $1 peg per token. And so, how we do that, and what we're kind of famous for in terms of how our stability works, is these modules called AMOs, or algorithmic market operations modules. And the idea behind it is that Frax is expanded or contracted in different protocols, such as like Curve, such as Aave, for example, to keep the exchange rate of Frax out in the open market at exactly a dollar. So I'll give you kind of an example with a Curve pool. So a Curve is the stable coin, and if, for example, the price of Frax is over a dollar, let's say it's $1.01 in Curve, what the Curve AMO does is it literally just mints Frax and deposits it in Curve. And in return, that smart contract gets Curve LP tokens, right? Let's say it mints 1 million Frax and brings the price back down to a dollar from $1.01, and it gets those Curve LP tokens. Then those Curve LP tokens are earning a yield or something, right? Or it could
Right.
deposit them in Convex. And it also has the exact opposite logic as well. Let's say the price of Frax is 99 cents and Frax supply needs to contract in the open market. So in that curve pool, what it does is it takes those LP tokens, withdraws the 1 million Frax that it can, and then burns it. So now the supply of Frax is now contracted by 1 million. And these two things are happening depending on what the price of Frax is. If it's over a dollar, it'll mint, bring it back down to a dollar. If it's under a dollar, it'll contract the supply, use its LP tokens to burn Frax and bring it back up to a dollar. Now, there's a bunch of other AMO modules, right? Like in lending markets like Aave, as well as Rari Capital's Fuse lending pools. There's basically Frax minted, right? And basically, if people want to take out that Frax, they have to over collateralize it with crypto. Same thing, same lending as everything, right? And then they can go and use it in the open market. If there's a lot of Frax that gets borrowed, and the price of Frax goes to 99 cents, then the lending AMOs then pull the remaining Frax lending liquidity and increases the interest rate, right? That all those people are paying to force them to repay as much of the Frax loans as possible. So then the Frax supply in the open market contracts. And both of these things are going on depending on the price of Frax on the open market. And so a lot of these things are just working in unison. So what the Curve AMO is doing and the lending AMOs are doing are happening at the same time. So there's basically a lot of things going on depending on the price of Frax in the open market. And I actually want to point out something that some people might not have seen, but yesterday MakerDAO actually released, I don't know if you saw this, they released this module called the Maker DAI Direct to Aave Lending module.
I saw that.
Yeah, it's actually really funny, and it's cool because it's exactly like verbatim. Like, I don't even want to say the variation, but it is verbatim down to the exact line what our Frax lending AMO does, which is,
Wow.
yeah. And
Wow.
obviously not the literal code, because there's this DAI and stuff, right?
Sure, sure.
Like Maker, but what it exactly does is, if there's a lot of demand for DAI, right, out in the open market, like the lending market, which is Aave, right, which is what that module targets, they will literally mint DAI, right, into the Aave lending market. And the exact opposite, you can actually go read the MakerDAO. it's called, I think, D3M module, or direct to Aave die minting module. And it's another just fancy new name for lending algorithmic market operations. But what's interesting about it is we have like a meme in the Frax community called like hashtag all roads lead to Frax, which is like the stuff that we've kind of invented and came out with. Obviously, we're not like owners of this idea or something like a copyright or anything like that, but we just like to see how it permeates, like the exact ideas, like we're onto something big, we're
Art.
onto something awesome. And it's cool to
Yeah.
see them like Maker use the exact same thing that, we've been using for like 6 months now since Frax V2.
So that's always an interesting emotional dynamic to that, because on one hand it's like, oh yeah, okay, so we thought of something really awesome and people are copying that, right? And that's a good feeling, it was
Mhm.
smart. Some of the biggest players in the space are going to utilize it. On the other hand, me personally, if I were in your shoes, it would be a little frustrating too. It's kind of like, okay, great. We love our ideas to spread. Crypto gets better. Everything in crypto gets better. But there's been a long-standing issue with the stability of DAI. And so obviously they needed something that was more stable. Do you guys kind of like go, yeah, that's great, but at the same time, man, it kind of sucks that they're copying exactly what we're doing?
Not too much, because I think I've been in the crypto space for a while, and I actually think, obviously, I don't want to say this is a fork, because it's not like a literal
Sure.
fork is MakerDAO, right? But like you said, I think when others kind of do the same thing that you started, it reinforces that you're onto something, right? And we
Right.
see that actually with a lot of, just straight up, for example, Olympus DAO forks. Like you had Zeus
Yeah.
on the show, and it's interesting because those guys, they have so much success now that no matter what you think about their economics and stuff, there's like 20 like Olympus DAO forks, right, on
Yeah.
on every chain. For us, it actually validates our kind of algorithmic stablecoin ideas, because one of the things I always say is that everything is kind of trending towards becoming an algorithmic stablecoin, and Frax had and has still the best and most innovative design. And so when you look at what Maker deployed with that, to direct DAI minting into lending markets, right? And it's just a lending AMO, then you think of, okay, Maker is starting to branch out from just being the over collateralized loan service within its own protocol into changing the exchange rate or supply of DAI out in the open market in different protocols, right? And this is kind of their first foray into that. The PSM, which is just a one-to-one swap between different stablecoins, peg stability module, was kind of a really basic way of doing that kind of foray, which is super basic, of just one-to-one swaps. So that one might not really count as for their foray into kind of becoming an algorithmic stablecoin. But I think this is undeniably something that Maker is becoming closer to Frax design, rather than Frax imitating any other stablecoin kind of design, right? And so I think it's cool. We're not in any way like concerned or saddened or anything like that. In fact, I mean, that's why we have the all roads lead to Frax meme uh, in the community. I actually think I'll make some predictions too. Let's see how they pan out. My predictions is there's a bunch of other things that we've developed, like other AMOs and things like that, that similar things are going to start panning out, and people using them either at Maker or other stablecoins. For example, we have a module that adds and removes Uniswap V3 concentrated liquidity. We just call that one the Uniswap V3 AMO, right? It's
Right.
basically different liquidity ranges of Frax and collateral. The other one, I described is easy to understand, the Curve AMO, which is the liquidity on Curve. I think those might take a few months for protocols like Maker, which move conservatively, and admittedly properly. They should move conservatively, but it might take a few months for them to start discussing something like, hey, like let's let's start making the peg stability module, which it was our just one-to-one swap, more algorithmic. Like let's deploy this liquidity to, the open market in Uniswap or Curve, and earn a yield on it, while it's idle, right? Like, stake the LP tokens under the control of their module, whatever they like to call it, right?
Right.
So I think that's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 months. So those are my predictions. Things will slowly converge in economic design to like the things that make the most objective sense. It's almost like economic evolution, right? It's almost like there's kind of the invisible hand of like the market guiding the design choices of stuff, and things that don't make sense kind of get discarded, and things that make sense people kind of collectively discover it in parallel at the same time, either together or individually, kind of like something cool in history, kind of like how Leibniz and Newton discovered calculus, but separately,
Right.
and around the same time, right?
And it happens constantly in tech. I mean, it's a constant thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so we don't have any, frustration or anything. I like it. Obviously, I like to kind of own the record about it. That's why I like to discuss it. But
Good.
yeah, and we think that just like every on-chain stablecoin will probably end up having these kind of algorithmic components where they will try to target their exchange rate out in the open market, much more, just which is basically what Frax's entire kind of theme is, as like a fractional, partly collateralized, partly algorithmic, supply chain stablecoin, which is actually kind of cool because it kind of brings us back to the current regulatory stuff that was, the president's report that came out yesterday on stablecoins. One of the interesting things, I don't know if you saw this, but they explicitly, without ambiguity, in one of the starting footnotes on the report, said that for all intents and purposes, the suggestions and the content of this report only explicitly in scope have to do with stable coins that are redeemable for fiat currency. So basically USDC, Tether, Paxos, and stuff like that, and not quote algorithmic stable coins. And they used that, they literally used the term algorithmic stablecoins as something to exclude, at least in this report. So like that
Right.
doesn't mean they won't go and be like algorithmic stablecoin report and regulatory recommendations. But what was really, really cool is they explicitly said that this report is not for algorithmic stablecoins. At least today it's not, and that actually was really, really bullish for me. I
Absolutely.
think, yeah, and it was kind of interesting that no one talked about it more. I thought it was extremely bullish, on-chain stablecoins.
Yeah, I tweeted yesterday. I said, "Oh man, I hope they continue to crack down on the centralized coins, because to me it's just fantastic news for you, right?" And it cracks me up the effects that regulators are actually going to have when you think about it. It's going to be things like USDT and USDC, which have completely centralized components. USDC can blacklist wallets and screw up entire components of the DeFi ecosystem. So there's one. So what's going to happen is they'll push people to, great projects like Frax. Two, when they start really cracking down on projects, they're going to shove everybody push everyone into being anonymous and truly decentralized, right? So projects will be completely released, completely decentralized, with no human able to do anything about it. And ultimately what they're going to end up with is more DeFi and more crypto, as far as I'm concerned, than less, right? Which I think is part of their goal. So, and less able to secure it or less able to regulate it. So I just think it's really interesting. And I love hearing that it was that explicit in the memorandum that this is for asset-backed stablecoins. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean, hopefully there's no like second, president's group on algorithmic stablecoins, but I think probably there won't be.
I do not believe there is that capacity within the federal government right now, so I'm not too concerned about that one happening.
Yeah,
When they're consulting with guys like Rohan Gray, who is pounding his fist for a centralized cryptocurrency for the federal government. I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And the way that my own regulatory kind of views have evolved have been kind of interesting because I actually, I think that it makes sense that the fiat collateralized, or I like to actually call it tradfi collateralized, because
There you go. I
um,
love it.
because it's not just fiat, right? We know obviously USDC, Tether and stuff, they have commercial paper, they have treasuries, and it's not literally fiat deposits, right? It's
Right.
not
It's even
one.
less that.
Yeah, and it's, I think people calling it TradFi collateralized would be a little bit more clearer, because then it makes sense if you have reserve requirements, or ways to transparently have to show government regulators what the actual reserves are. And for stuff like Frax, for example, it's all real time, deterministically on chain, right? Both assets and every single market operation. So even if, for example, there was suggestions of, well, fully on chain algorithmic stablecoins need to show their reserves, it's like, okay, well, they always, our reserves are always public, right? And
You
in
can look
every
at it.
sense,
Just
yeah.
here's the address, dude.
Exactly, right. And in fact, I mean, that's what our front end is, right? So you literally just have to go to app.frax.finance for a real-time audit report every single block of Ethereum. And the
That's
other
so
thing
awesome.
is, like, you can maybe make the claim that, hey, there has to be kind of reserve requirements, right? Just like how banks have capital reserve requirements, at least 10% of reserves have to be this kind of thing, or fiat, or deposits at the Fed or something like that. The other reason why algorithmic stablecoins don't even make sense to apply any of those things to is we have absolutely no link with TradFi collateral, right? So, for example, we're just talking about minting directly into lending markets, right? Like
Right.
Aave and things like that. And so the technical claim that the protocol has is tokens, right? The deposit of Frax into the lending market. What actual asset is that? How do you actually classify that, right? Or like a Curve LP token, is that like a asset that is part of a 10% reserve requirement? Is that a direct claim on LP tokens on Frax and other side of the collateral? Is that something that would require us to have the protocol hold at least 10% of, or something? That would be nonsensical, right? Because these are digital assets with absolutely no direct classification or guidelines. So it doesn't even make sense for algorithmic stablecoins to have a specific kind of reserve requirement, because there is no classification of reserves for digital on-chain assets, right? Like, what's an
Right.
LP token, what's a Aave interest bearing Frax token or something, right? And that's why it's looking good, because I think I hesitate here, because you never want to give too much credit, but to give credit where it's due, I think the people in the federal government, or at least that working group, do recognize that, actually. And so I do want to give credit in these specific cases, because I think they actually get that, which is
That's
um
cool.
yeah. And so, like, that was a good thing to wake up to yesterday. So
That's nice.
yeah,
That's
that was a
awesome.
good Monday.
Do you ever worry about the fact that you are doxxed, a known person, your photos out there, any of that? Does that keep you awake at night?
No, actually, I think every day, to be honest, I actually think we did the right thing. The only thing is, I wish I had a cool avatar, like all of these, like people that are in on, like Zeus, or Tetranode with the Wasi whale and all of these cool things. I actually want a metaverse avatar. So if anyone's like a cool artist, and wants to make
No.
embody, obviously everyone knows it's me, but I want to not be kind of always my real life picture on like Twitter and stuff like that. I want to kind of get into a alternate persona. But no, I'm not in any way worried about the anon stuff, because one of the things is, first of all, everyone kind of knows my own history. I've been in the space for a long time, done a lot of cool things, and thankful for a lot of, like, my past experience and things like that. And other than the fear of, like, regulatory stuff, I think it's been a complete benefit to early adoption of Frax and things like that to know, hey, there's a reputable team, Sam and the other core devs, Jason, Travis, and other people joining. We actually have someone named Dennis that helps us with economic modeling and everything. Everyone sees that the people kind of joining us are, really in like belief that we're building something really, really cool and novel, and they don't have to wonder like, who is it? Is it, someone that has like a past history of like rugging or this or that or whatever. And so I think it's actually helped Frax that we're not in on, other than I guess regulatory concerns. But we just talked about how for once it's starting to look pretty good for stable coins. So that's been good news.
That's awesome. No, and look, I think at the end of the day, people knowing that there's a real person there, certainly makes them feel safer and more comfortable and more willing to take part in the community and all of that. And I think the only way, I think obviously people like Zeus or Scoopy could go on and do other projects, and because of their reputation, their anonymity is actually not a hindrance. But I definitely think that the meritocracy of DeFi requires people to prove themselves. When you bring on a team like yours and you're out front and open, that makes people feel safer about it and more secure knowing there are real people there. And I think there's also an argument there that you were kind of making, that from a regulatory perspective, it's not something you're trying to hide, and the algorithm is working, and it's not kind of backed by this, TradFi paper, as you say, or TradFi financing. And that actually should make regulators feel better about it, right? From that perspective. And until somebody, at the end of the day, the regulators don't have enough resources to go after everything anyway. And until they're going to reach a point here where the only things they can go after are the ones that people have really been screwed over by, because they're not going to be able to keep up with everything that's going on. So I think that's a good argument. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's a really good way to put it, because it's like we stand by the fact that Frax is fully on chain and algorithmic, and there's nothing, there's no link to traditional financial stuff. There's no company, there's no anything like that. And here I am, I'm real and not anonymous, and I stand by that. So that's a good vote of confidence. And I think, actually, I think the main thing that's cool about being anonymous, again, is the metaverse body, been a metaverse avatar, and these things, and maybe I'm just like, I really just want one, and I want to just like have my own kind of brand like Tetranode and these other guys. But I think there's something cool about that, and actually not necessarily super protective against regulation. I think there's just something cool to be said about being this digital incarnation of something, and that people have a digital only and digital native representation of you as a founder of a protocol. That's actually super powerful. So I think
Yeah.
that's one of the actual benefits that people don't think about, that's more subtle.
And I think it actually is. And, not to go too philosophical and deep here, because I want to get into FPI more, but, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is that having these digital personas does a number of things. First of all, a lot of the non-developers and the non-participants are people that just, they're not necessarily trying to protect themselves from anything. They just want, like you say, a digital persona, right? That does a lot of things in the world that I think are incredibly positive. First of all, the meritocracy of DeFi, prove yourself. It's not about necessarily your resume. It's not necessarily about anything else. You're a developer, you're a creator, you're a whatever. It's about your work. It's about what you've done and how you've contributed and what kind of a member of the community you've been. And that's the reputation you built around that digital persona. The other thing that I think is interesting is in the real world, all of the biases that occur in the real world, whether it be on sexual identity, race, religion, whatever it might be, those will go away in this digital work DeFi participation world, right? There are no longer there's no longer I don't know if I shouldn't say a need, but there's no longer this necessity to think about those issues, because no one is being judged, or most people aren't being judged based on any of those things, right? These are the job interviews that are not really job interviews because it's just people proving what they can do. So I find this whole mix of the things that we're changing with DeFi, from DAO structures to identity, to be really interesting. And I think there's going to be a really significant societal impact across the board.
And just like quick to add on in a final comment on that topic, I totally agree. And there's a really online talk by Bology, who's also cool enough.
Oh, I love Bology. Yeah.
Frax investor. Yeah, he's great ideas on a lot of many things. And one of them is this decentralized identity, where, just like you're saying, the cool thing with these digital first identities is you can compartmentalize them, right? So for example, Scoopy is the Alchemix founder, and so he can come and say things authoritatively on DeFi and Alchemix, but then he doesn't necessarily have to mix that with, for example, political or socio-political things. He can have an alternate identity, or maybe that's his normal identity that no one knows is linked to Scoopy, right? You have these unlinked concepts, right, that you can separate from different identities. And Bology had a really better way of explaining it. So people that are interested in kind of these different identities should go and see that talk. He also to segue into Frax Price Index stuff, has some really cool thoughts on inflation and things like that, which is why he invested in Frax. But there's a lot of cool stuff he's doing with inflation tracking and things like that as well.
Excellent. I'll find those and put them in the show notes. And I follow him, and I've had it. It's funny. He and I will have some interactions on Twitter about something he brings up. I have some differences of opinions somewhat on media with him to some extent. And he always kind of brings it over to a DM chat with me. And I find it really interesting because I think that prevents those conversations from getting irrational. And so we actually have this private conversation going on, which is really an interesting tactic by him. But back to kind of what you were saying, and I think it makes a really valid point I hadn't thought about, is compartmentalizing identities, right? For me, I'm out front as me, but I also have really strong political opinions. And for the last several months, in order to kind of work on the podcast and build a brand and not be a divisive part of the ecosystem, because I want to play with the Bitcoiners and the Ethereum people and the Solana people and learn from everybody, right? I want to get all this knowledge and information. Well, if I start asserting my very strong political opinions, I'm going to piss a group off. So
right.
I've resisted
at least half of the people off, at least
exactly. Yeah. And I've resisted that. And it's actually been somewhat refreshing for me to not engage in negative conversations. So I will say there's an upside to it, a really strong personal, emotional upside that comes from that, because you're not kind of pulled into these heated arguments. And I will make comments occasionally on the periphery of the politics, but I used to be very, very, somebody could dive back way deep in my politics and see it. But there's a really strong argument there to be made, because I would still like to be participating in some of those discussions, but I'm not right now. I watch them, I read them, I follow people that I agree with and disagree with. So anyway, but let's talk about societal change, right? And that is really the big vision of FPI, because when in our first episode, the interview, we discussed the fact that inflationary impacts and the way prices are determined for consumers are a really critical factor in, your bigger vision of, you would really like Frax to become, a dominant currency in the world. And in order to do that and be successful as much as I think you want to be with it, you had to take on something much bigger, which is how pricing is determined. And so that, I think, and if I'm wrong, just tell me, I think that's a lot of the origin of where the Frax Price Index comes in. So could you kind of give people who don't necessarily understand how much impact there is with the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, how that impacts our lives, and then why you felt it was important to have the FPI and what you guys are doing and how that's going to function?
Yeah, definitely. First thing is, so the FPI is going to be the second stablecoin in the Frax, protocol ecosystem. And one thing to highlight about kind of the vision here is, like, a lot of people have asked, why doesn't Frax do like fractional euros or fractional, I don't know, like yen or other stablecoins, things like that, because you've already kind of proven the model with USD and stuff like that. And why don't you become kind of more of like a fractional synthetic assets kind of platform, right? Like how Synthetics or Terra's mirror ecosystem or something has all these different national currencies. And we don't have any interest in doing that because Frax is trying to kind of, be a like $1 trillion protocol vision, in the sense that we have two stable coins. And I think that's the only amount that you actually need: the current world unit of account and kind of, settlement medium, the dollar, right? And then whatever you hope people move to, right? And for us, it's the Frax Price Index, or kind of the successor to the dollar's unit of account for denomination of, debt, trade, and all of these things. So that's the reason there's only two stablecoins. That's the reason
Makes
Frax,
sense.
yeah, as a protocol, just concentrates on two, not like a synthetic assets platform, so to speak. And it actually, in my opinion, that actually makes the total addressable market cap and our actual focus and scope, exponentially larger than a synthetic assets kind of DEX or trading platform, because it's a Bitcoin slash Ethereum sized play in terms of the size of something we could be doing in the crypto market, right? It's, hundreds of billions, if not trillions, play in the next, 10 years, so to speak. But yeah, so the Frax Price Index and also the CPI stuff is interesting because until really recently, and
Hey,
people
Sam,
that,
can I interrupt you real quick? I'm sorry.
yeah,
Real quickly, was the FPI originally, your vision was that it was going to be a second stablecoin in the Frax family, or did that kind of evolve over time after thinking about tackling the CPI and FPI?
yeah, it was always supposed to be a stablecoin in the Frax ecosystem. So there's no
Cool.
other like governance token or anything. But I think if people are really really astute and were looking at original tweets about how I was thinking about it, I actually wrote some ideas about Frax, the stablecoin that's currently pegged to the dollar, slowly kind of depegging and transitioning to a different CPI based peg as its market cap got bigger, right? So that
Aha.
there's actually only be one stable coin. But then for both adoption reasons as well as just kind of technical reasons, I realized that's actually, we would be shooting ourselves in the foot, because all of the places that depend on using Frax as a dollar, right, and curve pools and liquidity and everything, if that was slowly changing as a function of how large Frax, the stablecoin, was growing, those things would all slowly break as like the peg was not tracking the dollar but moving towards like a custom peg. So I thought, actually, we just should have a second stablecoin, right, from the beginning.
That
And
makes total sense.
yeah, and it shouldn't interfere. And it's interesting because Olympus, as a lot of people probably know, has done a really good job in basically coming up with a single token model for a kind of reserve currency, so to speak. And something that's interesting as well about the Frax protocol is I believe we're the largest protocol holders of out of any other protocol or DeFi project. So
Love
we're
that.
one of the first partners together in like May and June. And I actually really like their overall unit model, like the fact that there's only one token. So the FPI is not planned to be rebasing or have bonds or be any kind of code similarity, but it is the only resemblance that it has to is that you can stake FPI for more FPI rewards. And it is a high yield stablecoin in its growth phase, which I think that's the innovation Olympus DAO actually started, and in collaboration with them and stuff, we're building part of how the FPI, we're thinking about the single token model of it is similar. But there's no bonds endogenously, there's no currently no planned rebasing token, but there is single asset stablecoin FPI staking is in the plans.
Can't wait. Okay, so I took you off track. Let's head back to CPI, FPI, and why, and then kind of the model for how it functions.
Yeah, so one thing that's interesting is in the crypto space, there wasn't a lot of talk about the dollar itself tracking the consumer price index, or what stability actually means and what it is, until two things recently. and now everyone's talking about the CPI and stuff like that. One is the a lot of dollar printing in the past, 1 to 2 years, nominally, like the supply of dollars increasing a substantial amount because of the COVID pandemic. And then two is the stablecoin industry proliferating and exponentially kind of expanding, right? And so there's this talk of what is a stablecoin, what is actually stability and stuff like that in a more introspective and kind of philosophical outlook. I remember when I was kind of talking about the the dollar actually being pegged or loosely tracking the CPI back in early this year on crypto Twitter. I think it was like one of the first times where in like crypto people were actually talking about the CPI itself and things like that. And that was like the first times I was starting to say the Frax Price Index like as like a brand and things like that. And it's crazy how just 6 7 months later, everyone in crypto is talking about what's in the CPI. How does the CPI work? Like why are they underreporting stuff in the CPI? And it's cool that it's become an extremely central point in the crypto economic discussion. And so for people that don't know, right, the US dollar, the Fed's monetary policy is that every month the US Department of Labor and Statistics releases a consumer price index report of the items that US consumers most buy and basically reports in, I think they still do it by telephone survey, which is really archaic, but in
Yeah.
basically consumer surveys by the federal government, and then the prices of those items. So for example, the consumer price index is composed of like food, right? There's meats and poultry, the prices of those things are in there. There's electronics, laptops, there's cars, used cars, new cars, and things like that. There's healthcare, right? Because healthcare is a service, and people use that, and it's a big expenditure. And then the idea behind the CPI is that the Federal Reserve looks at the dollar prices of these things every month in this report, right? And then how much the average consumer spends on them. And so that's the weight of the index. So like if, for example, they spend 10% of their consumer expenditure on food, and to put it simply, let's say there's only two types of food: chicken, meat, and beef or something, right? Then the food component of the CPI is 10%, because that's what the survey said. And then the subgroup of the food is just chicken and beef, right?
Right.
And next month, if consumers reported spending 20% on food, right, then the index for food will double in size and become 20% in weight rather than 10. And I'm simplifying a bunch of stuff, so let's just say that it's just those, chicken and beef, and then the sub size of those will be however much they report on spending on chicken and then on beef. And then the dollar is supposed to track the exchange rate of all of those things, plus 2.5% inflation per year. What that means is supposed to lose 2.5% value against the entire basket per year to spur reinvestment or spending of the dollar, right? Instead of kind of hoarding it and kind of making spending it a first priority to keep the economy going and wealth creation and investing it in productive uses rather than holding idle and kind of inert currency, right? And
Right. So our
that's
entire economic system is meant to make sure people keep spending.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's there's goods and bads for that, right?
Sure.
The good thing about that is, well, you want them to spend on things to put dollars in productive uses, right? You want them to either invest in stocks, equities, companies that are producing things, or spending it in the economy, right? And consuming. The bad part about it is it's a hyper consumerist, economy. You can't hold. There's an implicit inflation tax to holding your actual dollars per year, right? And people debate about this on Twitter and things like that. But the general idea is that the dollar should and is in designed to loosely track the CPI. So that the thought is, well, why not create that in a crypto native system where you have a stable coin that tracks some basket of exchange rates. To keep things super simple, let's just bring the CPI itself, literally the thing we're talking about, that the federal government uses, just on chain, right? And in fact, we are with the Frax Price Index, we're working with Chainlink to create a custom, first of its kind CPI oracle that is updated once a month. I wish it was updated faster, but that's how the government updates the CPI. But Chainlink is bringing that in for us. And then on chain, you can have governance that tracks that CPI plus or minus, either new indices or exchange rates, or even a anti-inflation target. What if you want to grow against the CPI by, 5% rather lose 2.5% against it, or things like that, right? And you have a stable coin that is algorithmically adjusted in supply in on chain in the open markets to track this CPI oracle. And that's basically the simple form of what the Frax Price Index is. It's the first stable coin of its kind to have a consumer price index plus crypto native governance or new indices, and track those exchange rates as if it has its own definition of what stability actually is. So that's what's really cool and novel about it. There's no dollar peg, although it should basically, in effect, loosely track the dollar plus not be inflated, right? So it should actually be growing in purchasing power slightly against the dollar. So
Nice.
that's what's cool about it.
So that's the real advantage of it is that the algorithm actually, rather than having the same inflationary mechanisms, will actually allow this to have more value over time instead of less value over time.
Yeah, it'll exactly compared to, again, everything in pricing is a reference point, right? And compared to the CPI plus crypto native indices, and so it should have more value growing against a basket of consumer items. And I find that really elegant because I always say the best currency is actually one that keeps your standard of living constant, right? In fact, what Balaji talks about is he has this term called a flat coin rather than a stable coin, which means flat and constant purchasing power compared to a basket of things that keep your standard of living the same, right? Compared to a basket of essential consumer goods, right? And that's a really important concept that no one's really building in DeFi. And I think the closest thing is Olympus, which they branded as kind of a reserve currency, and I think that that's really powerful as well. It's slightly different, so I think we're symbiotically, not competitive, but symbiotically beneficial to each other. So the cool thing is, if you think about what an investment, for example, is, an investment by definition is something that should increase your standard of living, right? If it's a
Right.
good one, right? You should be able to afford more, whatever consumer items you like, right? Like cars or expensive things, or things like that, if that's, what you define, right? And if it's a bad investment, you'll probably, lower your standard of living if you've allocated too much to it and stuff. But notice how it requires a kind of anchor to what actually a standard of living is, right? So currency is something you can denominate investments in, right? It's something
Right.
you can actually have some currency as a stable, flat reference point, and allocate into things like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or things that are really good investments. And hopefully, those increase the amount of the currency you can sell into, right? If you want to realize some standard of living gains, so to speak, right? And so that makes sense, and it's really powerful. And that's also why, that the dollar is, at least for now, give recently things have been kind of weird in the macroeconomics with
Yeah.
the pandemic, but until recently the dollar's been the best financial primitive for doing that, right? And that's also why Bitcoin went from starting out as peer-to-peer cash branding to digital gold and things like that, because Bitcoin is a good investment. I don't think many people, other than really die-hard Bitcoin maximalists and stuff, think that it's a great currency, because my own view is that those things are anathema. They're actually kind of a little bit mutually exclusive, being a good investment and being a good currency. And
Right.
there's the Bitcoin kind of diehard narrative of first you have to be a store of value, and then then medium of exchange, and then after it has multi-trillion market cap or something, then you become the medium of exchange, the actual currency and stuff. But I don't know.
But
I don't know if that's actually what's going on with Bitcoin. I think it's still a great investment, and so no one's really looking to spend it, even with Lightning and things like that you can send cheap Bitcoin. I don't think people are, other than again diehard Bitcoin guys, denominating things like loans or things like that in Bitcoin. I don't think that's actually rising, and that's okay. That's not a knock on Bitcoin. I think it's a fantastic investment, but it just shows that you take out loans in the future against a currency usually, because that's the thing that is constant against a stable standard of living, right?
right,
um,
absolutely. Well, it's fascinating because Zeus actually said that one of the reasons he had been a Bitcoin maximalist, and one of the reasons that he created Ohm was that he realized that Bitcoin was never going to be the currency. He felt deflated by the fact that he finally realized that Bitcoin was never going to be the currency that he had always thought it was, and that had been the line that people had always given him, was that it was going to end up being a currency. And so I find it fascinating that it's a similar train of thought there. So something else I think that is important here is that this is superior for normal people, right? This is something that allows normal people who now, under the current inflationary system, are the people who most impacted by the inflation and the loss in value of their dollars, right? And they are the ones most expected to spend the money in order to keep the economy going. The wealthiest in this country or the world actually aren't as greatly impacted by it because they have investment vehicles available to them that shield them from that. So I find it also, I think part of the branding here is, and part of the problems that Bitcoin's been trying to solve and everybody's been trying to solve, is this inflationary impact on normal people. And that this now with FPI actually allows people to actually retain their value. And we were discussing the other day, I have this lunch show I do with my friend Joe, and about DeFi, and we were talking really deeply about the fact that a lot of these vehicles that allow you to earn this yield have the potential to create kind of perpetual incomes for people, right? They still have to take it out into fiat right now and to USD and utilize it, but it has the potential to create this perpetual yield. Well, if there is a FPI like project or token for them that is based on what the current consumer price index is out there, but can actually help them grow their value or maintain constancy, or flat token, as you said, Balaji speaks to it. That's an incredibly powerful model, right? I mean, I assume you believe that. That's why you guys are creating it, but
Yeah, well, 100%. That's actually kind of what I was saying in the example as well, is that people just have to hold part of their wealth, the amount that they want to have stable to a standard of living across time, in like FPI. People shouldn't, have all of their wealth, because basically like having it in an inflation resistant cash, you want it to have it in good investments, right? You want to actually be in Bitcoin and Ethereum, in all of these other things. And you want part of your portfolio that you want to live off of, right? Or you want to actually spend and do accounting in, uh, flat against a set of consumer items, right? That you need, like food, like electronics and transportation, things like that, healthcare. And I think that that's the powerful thing, is it might sound a little bit like it's not a $1 trillion kind of crypto market cap narrative, because it's like, well, if everyone holds a little bit, like parked stable coins in FPI, it only sounds like people hold like 10% of their wealth. But if most people in DeFi hold 5 to 10% of their wealth here, that's a top 5 cryptocurrency, right? It's
right,
bigger
that's
than
gigantic.
yeah, exactly. And so that's exactly what it is. In fact, like, the important thing is this isn't competitive against any good investment like Bitcoin or Ethereum. And there's, in the really hardcore like Bitcoin is money, ETH is money, or like my favorite L1 token is money kind of subgroups. The idea is like the L1 token has to do everything. Like that thing has to be everything. It's simultaneously a good investment, but also simultaneously good to spend on like consumer stuff, which is, it seems totally oxymoronic, right?
Yeah.
And like, but like, because being a currency as well and denominating things, increases the scope of the top of the market cap of the thing, right? Makes it like $1 trillion crypto narrative. It also has to be that, just in case, right? So that there's
Right.
like still 1,000x upside or whatever. But in fact, I think the FPI that we're working on is just more honest. Is like, we don't expect, or people probably shouldn't have more than like 10% of their on-chain wealth or something in FPI, because unless you think you're cycling everything into stablecoins, right?
Right.
You shouldn't have more FPI, right? Like, you
Right.
should have it as about what you want in terms of something to live off of that keeps your standard of living the same, and you also don't have to worry about the Fed's target inflation, which is
Right.
pretty powerful. I actually think that that is $1 trillion thing, even though most people
Huge.
won't hold, half of their portfolio, or shouldn't even hold half of their portfolio in the Frax Price Index.
That's fantastic. So what happens? What's the really ongoing relationship between, and what happens with Frax versus FPI going forward?
Yeah, so it's actually going to be interesting, because some things with the FPI will start out with being partly dollar collateralized with decentralized stablecoins. So obviously, part of FPI Treasury or FBI balance sheet, kind of like Olympus DAO, will be backed by decentralized stablecoins like Frax. We're talking with other people who, projects that want to partner with it. Fei is a really cool project, another algorithmic stablecoin, perhaps partly back FPI with Fei as well. I don't know if you've had Joey Santoro on your show, or you know him, but he's like a super smart guy, and he sees
Not
the
yet.
with it. Yeah, you totally should. He's a
Cool.
really smart guy. So those kinds of stable coins, decentralized ones, Frax obviously its own stable coin, and Fei will partly back the FPI, because remember the mechanics here, right? The dollar is losing value against the CPI, right? The reported consumer price index, and then the Frax price index has to gain a certain amount of value, whatever the kind of governance target is, and the other crypto native indices are. So if you have a balance sheet of dollars that's like losing, 2.5%, and you're targeting of gaining, for example, 5% against the CPI, that means that the rest of the non-stablecoin balance sheet of the FPI has to gain by 7.5%, right? Because the net
Right.
gain is 5%. And so the relationship is super symbiotic with the Frax stablecoin, because at the beginning, we at least need to compose the FPI balance sheet with decentralized stablecoins, right? And what better decentralized stablecoin than the actual endogenous one that the protocol has kept at a perfect peg? And then other partners such as Fei and other partners that we're talking to that we haven't really announced yet. But those stablecoins will partly back the FPI. Obviously, there has to be other assets that gain at least, the inflation plus the target. But it's almost like, for your listeners that are pretty well in the know of how Ohm works, imagine if kind of the Ohm floor of Olympus DAO Treasury was the CPI plus some inflation resistance, and it was just increasing in value, right? If the RFV, risk-free value, is what they call it, of Olympus, was slowly growing in an algorithmic sense, tracking an oracle price of CPI and inflation, right? Then you basically would need to have your treasury growing at minimum at that rate, right? To always have the
Right.
risk-free value of this thing. And then any kind of extra single asset FPI staking that we would offer. So I don't know if we would offer something, or the protocol can sustain something as incredibly, lucrative as Olympus's, 8,000 or 10,000%. But anything above the actual CPI APY then is paid out in FPI, which it represents future growth of the balance sheet, right? And,
That's
and so that
awesome.
that makes sense. And there will be high yield, obviously, for staking FPI as well. But the thing is, we want to kind of make sure people's expectations are tempered, in the sense that it's not as volatile in the upside or the APY as Olympus. It's basically a CPI tracking and growing version of Ohm, with very unique and novel ways of rebalancing and algorithmically changing the balance sheet on chain, that's not, bonds or the same code base.
Right. Well, and at the end of the day, it makes people holding or part of the community have a direct interest in the growth and success of the use of the token, right? So that's always a plus as far as I'm concerned. What do you think kind of has to happen for FPI to become that, $1 trillion component of our economy
Hmm.
or more?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is, if this kind of grand vision works out, it will, to be honest, and this might sound a little boring, but I think it will happen in a boring and slow manner, like the saying goes, like slow, like what is it, like slowly and then suddenly all at once or something. And I think the reason I say it's boring is, like, I don't think people will notice or care very much, or even they themselves would even notice, if they're using FPI, but only like 5% of their portfolio is FPI. And then, it's really cool. It's yielding a lot, but it's a side thought, right?
Yeah, it's just kind of
It's
sitting there.
yeah, it's like it's cool. Oh, it's a stable coin and I'm earning some yield, but like, what's the new shiny, token or protocol or NFT or whatever, right? And then, if everyone thinks that way, even if it doesn't sound like it's a $1 trillion narrative, everyone has 5 to 10% of their portfolio in the first kind of CPI crypto native stablecoin that is a top five crypto, like that,
Right.
for sure, right? And so,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think that will happen, hopefully, if this whole thing is correct, is it'll happen slowly. It won't just like explode, to the top, or whatever, like the coolest shiny kind of investment, and then maybe then like dump 60% and then recover a little bit, or things like that. It's exactly supposed to be the opposite of that, right?
Right.
And
That's the
so,
entire model.
yeah, and even though it's a little bit boring, I think people will kind of slowly come to realize, hey, wait a minute, like, I've held this, the Frax Price Index for a while, and it's been good to me in yield and stability and stuff. And then everyone will kind of say that, and then look around and realize, wait, are we all just holding like 3, 5, 6, 10% of our wealth? And then you look at on CMC or CoinGecko or something, and you're like, holy crap, it's like number 4 or like number 10 or something.
Right. No, that's awesome. I love that vision of it. I think it makes logical sense, right? It makes sense that people would treat it that way, and love having the idea that it's stable, and I don't want to say safe, because nothing is ultimately completely safe, but
Right.
safe
Yeah.
in their wallet, earning something for them, not devaluing, and being there for when they need it.
And earning yield as well, right? Single
Right.
asset, right? And that's even better.
That's an absolutely awesome thing, and it's just one asset. And you're not worrying about pairing and impermanent loss and everything else. Does it become something that, in order to get people to have it at that 3 to 5% or 10% level in their wallet, that it has to start integrating with other DeFi projects, right? Which I think you guys have already started kind of that networking and that business development of partnering with other projects with Frax. Does it have to be part of other projects? And then, is there a point where you and the community and the team have to kind of start thinking about, how do we permeate the real world outside of DeFi with Frax? Is that something you think about or worry about for kind of growing to where you want to grow to? Or do you think that it just becomes part of more and more people coming into crypto, and there's Frax and it's part of the ecosystem, and so it just gets adopted?
Yeah. So definitely, obviously, if it's going to be a trillion-dollar narrative or even like top five crypto or something, it has to be used everywhere, right?
Right.
And there's no exception. There's no way it can be top cryptocurrency without it being everywhere, essentially, right? And what we have to do is we have to get people basically comfortable denominating debt in CPI. And there's a lot of intricacies, economically, if it's super inflation resistant or like massively growing against the dollar, for example, you would never short this, right? You would never take debt in like FPI to, go buy like a house or something, because what if the FPI outgrows the real estate rate or something like that, right? You'd much rather take a loan in dollars, which is going to inflate, right?
Makes sense.
So there's a lot of intricacies to solve, but I think with the fact that Frax is becoming kind of a DeFi household name, it's going to be really at least easy to get integration and experimentation with the FPI. And that's also, it's something Olympus also has to figure out as well. And we both, as a community that has a lot of crossover, have to figure out. For example, everyone likes to lever long, for example, on ohm, right? They actually borrow a lot of Frax to buy more ohm and then
Right.
stake it because there's such a high APY. But then no one's denominating debt in ohm, at least right now. Obviously, why
Right.
would you? That's a really scary thing to do that because this thing is growing at advertised 8,000% APY. But you have to eventually have debt denominated in FPI or ohm or whatever if you want it to be a unit of account, right? So people
Right.
account their debts in it. So we were totally cognizant of that. But then the fact that our other stablecoin Frax is being used to denominate debt and can actually help out the FPI and like integrations and these things, I think is a really, really important thing. Because imagine, for example, if Olympus had its own endogenous dollar pegged stablecoin, right? That would be very, very powerful. It could basically borrow from that side of its own protocol's balance sheet and then issue ohm against it rather than have to buy DAI and Frax and LUSD and stuff. It's kind of actually similar a little bit to what MIM is doing, Magic Internet Money,
Right.
Abracadabra with Wonderland, which is, it's yeah, it's a self-described Olympus DAO kind of direct fork, and I think Daniele, specifically even says that, they were supposedly going to buy or give a lot of props or time tokens or whatever to Olympus because it's a straight just fork for fundraising reasons and increasing the supply of MIM, the Magic Internet Money stablecoin, right?
Right.
But the FPI is something that's like entirely completely different vision, but then we also benefit from the synergy that we also have the same endogenous stablecoin. It's interesting because I think that these kind of new peg you know things like FPI, I guess Wonderland as well, really benefit from having a very close relationship with a decentralized stablecoin, essentially, right? And
Right.
decentralized stablecoin means dollar, right? And then the successor of whatever the pegged currency is going to be to the dollar. So you see these kinds of relationships again emerging naturally, right? Again, like this kind of economic evolution of things converging, looking fairly similar, right? So it's going to be really interesting to see how that pans out, basically.
Yeah, very. And you know, have you guys, so one of, Danielle at Wonderland, Abracadabra, Mim, was actually talking about building an ecosystem of DAOs and startups around their projects. And it seems like that could be something very cool to see build up around FPI, right? Is applications that are integrated with the real world, applications that are in DeFi, that you guys could actually build your own ecosystem around the FPI or
Yeah,
incubate.
yeah, definitely. In fact, just like people hold ohm on their treasury and like Frax does, like I was saying, we are one of the largest holders. People can hold FPI, and one of the main things, one of the benefits with FPI is it has a clear price floor target rather than a volatile price floor target. It's staying constant against CPI and growing against inflation, right? Versus with ohm, the benefit with Ohm is that it's still volatile at the floor, but the APY is really high, right? The APY is the advantage it has against something like the Frax Price Index. But then the disadvantage is that the price floor is extra volatile, right? Versus with the FPI, the price floor is totally algorithmic, tracks the CPI Oracle and stuff like that. So I think there's going to be a very, very diverse kind of Cambrian explosion of people using not just Frax, the stablecoin, but FPI and integrating it in DAOs and things like that, the same way that we're actually using Ohm, right? And
Right.
kind of
No,
see.
I definitely think that makes sense. And I think it makes sense for projects like Olympus and Frax FPI to help grow projects around it, and I there's a breed of projects like yours that have raised the standard significantly for DeFi. And so and yeah, and it's making a huge difference. I mean, it's getting labeled DeFi 2.0 or whatever you want to call it. But the bottom line is it's people that are thinking about a much bigger play, right? It's kind of the maturing of the entire crypto space into something that's actually real and something that has positive impacts on everybody that's involved with it, but also incredible potential in the real world. And that's been kind of one of my base investment theses for me is is this project thinking about important things like stability and power and a big picture vision of changing the world, and can I see it translate into use in real life, right? And there's only a few projects that for me meet that standard, and obviously this is one of them.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to say also one of the things is like in crypto, it's easy to make money these days without, making the world a better place. You have
Yeah.
just, fun games, or you have, dog coins, which I love. And there's nothing bad about them, but some people gravitate towards the fact that you can make money and not necessarily make an impact. And that's fine. They can do that and stuff. But one of the most important things, and the reason why, for example, the FPI is totally new, it's not like a fork of a fork of a fork or something, or like, hey, like let's launch this, I bet it'll get like 500 million TVL, or like pump the price or whatever. The reason we do stuff that's like extremely difficult, but also obviously has like a hopefully a top five crypto or $1 trillion vision kind of thing, is it's difficult to be a positive impact in the world than it is in crypto, than just to make money, right? Especially these days. And one of the main things that I always try to do is try to see how to be a positive sum value creating, live player in the ecosystem, rather than kind of value extractive, or like make money and take it, right? And because that's not ultimately what this is all about, especially what the kind of reason I even, got into crypto as like a college student and stuff. It wasn't like, oh, I bet I could make a bunch of money from this. Back in like 2013, you actually couldn't. There was not really much of anything you could make money into. So it's just more of the idealistic, but really important reasons. Like people kind of see Vitalik, for example, as a really good kind of thought leader and kind of leader of the broader, Ethereum slash crypto space, because I think he's also motivated by the same thing of you want to make the world like a better place and actually create positive value, rather than try to extract or absorb value from somewhere, right? In like a zero sum manner. So I always think, how do you create actual value and make things better, rather than just simply how does value come to me, or like the thing I'm building, or things like that.
Absolutely. No, and it's evident. It's evident in what you deliver. And like I said, I don't think there are very many people doing it, and or approaching it with that philosophy anymore. I do think there are plenty of people still believe that crypto can change the world and that are ways to do it, but there are very few projects I think that are actually delivering on it like yours. And that to me is a really important. It's not only important because I think ultimately I could make a lot of money on these projects I'm investing in, because I think long term these are not only DeFi plays that make money, they are fundamentals that could fundamentally change life, and
Mhm.
that ultimately can be incredibly wealth generating for everyone that's involved in them, right?
Yeah.
But the fact that it has the mission in mind as it's doing it is a huge differentiator for me, and a big part of my focus. I certainly degen into crap to make extra money and have fun, but I have a core, thesis that I stick to, and I'm excited to see what FPI is going to do. I think this is like really big vision, big mission, and has a lot of cross applications. And I think building ecosystems around projects like yours will make a lot of sense, because I think the people who will come to build on them will share the vision. I cannot wait to hear about this launching. I'm going to be heavily involved financially, but I'm really excited for you and the team and the community and everybody that's stuck with you guys as you build and grow. And how should people get involved with the project? How should they reach you guys, visit you, etc.?
Yeah, the best place is our main Telegram community. It's just at Frax Finance. Our Twitter is the exact same username, at Frax Finance. I'm super available. Telegram, Twitter, Discord, and if I'm literally not sleeping, I'm working on all this stuff, and I'm always available and approachable. So join us, talk about Frax, the FPI, and if you have ideas, want to build anything, we're literally all day and all night, depending on where you are, just working on this stuff. So hit us up, and it'd be awesome to get people involved.
Awesome, Sam. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for explaining everything, and the best of luck to everyone, because I think it's in all of our best interest for you to have great success with this.
Thanks, Brad. Love your show, and it's great to be on a second time. Take care.
Thanks, man. We'll get you on again later after we launch.
For sure. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Most of us in the DeFi space are investing to make more money, but most of us as well should be in the space for making an impact. And we should be investing in the projects like Frax that are going to try to change the world. And that's what motivates me to be involved and to spread the word about how much we can do to impact the world through DeFi. So I'm excited to see what Sam and the team are creating. I'm excited to see the impact that this massive experiment will have on the financial world and on financial freedom. And I love the ability to be able to hear about these projects in depth and share some time with these really brilliant founders. If you liked what you heard today, please like, review, share, subscribe, tell people about it, and spread the word for financial freedom. Thanks so much for listening.